I'm Danielle, 32, and yesterday my phone buzzed during a client meeting. A group text from my entire family appeared. We need distance from you. Please stop contacting us completely. No explanation, no warning. 17 missed calls later, no one answered. Their voicemails were full, social media blocked. My brother's phone disconnected, my sister's apartment empty. My parents' neighbor said they left with suitcases that morning. My entire world collapsed as I realized my family had just collectively erased me from their lives without even telling me why. Before I share how my life imploded overnight, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. This family drama took me on the most unexpected journey of my life, and if you've ever felt betrayed by those closest to you, you'll understand why I couldn't just let this go. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happened when I uncovered the truth behind why my family abandoned me, and give this video a like if you've ever had to face a painful family secret. Now let me tell you how my perfect family facade crumbled. Until that text message, I believed I had the picture-perfect family. As a successful marketing executive at Wilson & Brooks Agency in Chicago, I'd built my life around my career and my tight-knit family unit. Though I was single and focused on work, my family had always been my constant support system and safe harbor. My parents, Margaret and Robert Wilson, had been married for 35 years and lived in the same suburban home where I grew up. My younger siblings, Amanda, 29, and Brian, 27, both lived within a 30-minute drive of our parents. Amanda worked as an elementary school teacher, while Brian had struggled to find his path bouncing between jobs before recently landing a position at a local insurance company. Sunday dinners at my parents' house were mandatory family time. Mom would cook her famous pot roast or lasagna, while Dad mixed his signature old fashions. We'd gather around the dining table that had hosted every birthday, holiday, and celebration throughout our lives. Those dinners were sacred time filled with laughter, occasional bickering, and the comfortable rhythm of people who knew each other inside and out. Just 2 weeks ago, we'd had a family reunion at Lake Geneva to celebrate Dad's 60th birthday. All the extended family came: aunts, uncles, cousins. We rented 3 lakeside cabins and spent the weekend boating, grilling, and reminiscing about family vacations. Everything seemed perfect though. Looking back, there were subtle signs I should have noticed. Several times I walked into rooms to find conversations abruptly stopping. At first I dismissed it as surprise party planning or gift coordination. But there was an undertone of tension, especially when Uncle Frank had too many beers and kept giving me strange looks across the bonfire. My mother seemed particularly protective, staying close to me throughout the weekend. Before we left, she hugged me tighter than usual and whispered, "Family protects its own, always remember that." At the time, I thought she was just being sentimental. Growing up, I'd always been the responsible one, the achiever. My parents had high expectations for me from an early age. While Amanda and Brian were allowed to figure out their paths more freely, I was the one who needed to bring home straight A's, who captained the debate team, who got accepted to Northwestern with a partial scholarship. I didn't mind the pressure, I thrived under it, and my parents' pride in my accomplishments felt worth every late-night studying. My apartment in downtown Chicago was filled with family photos. The bookshelf in my living room displayed vacation snapshots, formal portraits, and candid moments captured throughout the years. I called my mom at least 3 times a week, usually on my commute home from work. We'd chat about everything and nothing: her garden, my latest work projects, neighborhood gossip. Our last call had been completely normal, with her reminding me to bring the potato salad to Sunday dinner. My final conversation with Amanda had been more tense. We'd met for coffee last Thursday, and she seemed distracted, checking her phone constantly. When I asked if everything was okay, she snapped at me, which was unusual for her typically easygoing personality. We smoothed things over before parting, and she gave me a quick hug with a promise to see me Sunday. That dinner never happened. The most significant recent family event was helping Brian financially. 3 weeks ago, he'd approached me about a temporary cash flow problem. He needed $15,000 to cover some unexpected expenses related to his new apartment and starting his job. I'd hesitated. Brian had borrowed money before and had been inconsistent about repaying it. But he seemed so genuine about getting his life together, and as his big sister, I wanted to support his fresh start. I transferred the money from my savings account to his the next day. The evening after receiving that devastating group text, I checked my bank account out of habit while trying to process what was happening. There it was, a withdrawal of $15,000 from my savings account to Brian's processed yesterday, the day before the text. The timing couldn't be coincidental. What had begun as confusion was now transforming into suspicion. Why would my brother take my money right before my entire family cut contact with me? None of it made sense, but I was starting to realize this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. The first 24 hours after receiving that text passed in a blur of denial. This had to be a mistake, a cruel prank, or a bizarre misunderstanding. People don't just erase their family members without explanation. I kept staring at my phone, reading and rereading the message, as if additional words might materialize to explain this nightmare. My initial response was a flurry of calls and texts. I started with my mother, always my closest confidant. Her phone rang straight to voicemail. "Mom, it's me. I got your text. There must be some mistake. Please call me back. I'm worried." Next was my father, then Amanda, then Brian. Each call went unanswered. I left increasingly desperate voicemails, my voice cracking as the reality began to sink in. By evening, I'd sent over 30 texts to various family members. "What's going on? Did I do something wrong? Please just tell me what happened. I'm really scared. At least let me know you're all okay." The message indicators showed they'd been delivered, but not read. Or perhaps they'd been read and ignored. I even tried creating a new group chat, thinking maybe there was a technical glitch with the previous one. No response. The next morning I called in sick to work, something I rarely did. I couldn't focus on marketing strategies and client presentations when my personal life was imploding. I drove the 45 minutes to my parents' suburban home, rehearsing what I would say when they opened the door, but nobody answered my knocks. Their cars weren't in the driveway, and the house had an unmistakable emptiness about it. Mail was accumulating in the box. I rang the doorbell of Mrs. Abernathy, their next-door neighbor for the past 20 years. She answered in her gardening clothes, initially smiling at the sight of me, before registering my distress. "Danielle, are you all right? You look terrible." "Have you seen my parents?" I asked, not bothering with pleasantries. Her expression shifted to something between concern and discomfort. "They left early yesterday morning. Your father loaded several suitcases into the car. I assumed they were taking a vacation." "Did they say where they were going or when they'd be back?" "No, dear. Robert just waved and said they'd be gone for a while." "Is everything okay?" I couldn't bring myself to explain, so I just thanked her and left. Next, I drove to Amanda's apartment across town. Same story, no answer, mail piling up. Her neighbor confirmed he'd seen her leave with a suitcase the previous morning. Brian's apartment yielded similar results. When I called his workplace, the receptionist informed me he'd taken an indefinite personal leave starting yesterday. I spent the afternoon contacting family, friends, and more distant relatives. Most didn't answer. Those who did responded with variations of, "I don't know anything," or "I'm sure they'll contact you when they're ready." Their voices held the same uncomfortable tone. Mrs. Abernathy's had people who knew something but wouldn't tell me. By the third day, physical symptoms of stress had set in. I wasn't eating or sleeping. Dark circles formed under my eyes, and my hands trembled slightly. When I finally returned to work, my boss Jessica immediately noticed. "You look like hell," she said, bluntly closing my office door behind her. "What's going on?" I broke down explaining the bizarre situation through tears. Jessica listened without interrupting, then pulled up a chair beside me. This isn't normal, Danielle. Have you considered filing a missing persons report? They're not missing, I said, wiping my eyes. They're deliberately avoiding me, all of them simultaneously. They're just gone. She suggested I take a few more days off, which I declined. Work was the only thing keeping me sane. That evening, I discovered all family members had blocked me on social media. My mother's active Instagram account, my father's Facebook fishing groups, Amanda's teacher page, Brian's LinkedIn, all showed the same message when I searched for them. User not found. It was as if I'd been surgically removed from their digital lives as well. The final blow came when I checked the shared family Google Calendar we'd used for years to coordinate events. My birthday coming up next week had been removed from the calendar. The entry that had existed for months, Danielle's birthday dinner at Rosetta's 7 p.m., had been deleted. I scrolled through the next several months of family events: Thanksgiving at Mom and Dad's, Amanda's school winter concert, the annual Wilson Christmas Eve party, all still there minus any mention of me. In a last desperate attempt, I wrote a long emotional email to my entire family. I poured out my confusion, hurt, and fear. I begged for an explanation, any explanation, and promised to make amends for whatever I might have done. I told them I loved them and couldn't understand what had happened. I hit send at 2 a.m., emotionally exhausted. By morning, the email had bounced back from all recipients. Message blocked by recipient. My desperation was turning to anger tinged with fear. I began questioning my own sanity. Had there been signs I'd missed? Was I somehow the villain in this story without realizing it? I tore through recent text conversations and emails, looking for clues, finding nothing but normal family interactions. That afternoon, while searching through my wallet for a receipt, I found something tucked behind my driver's license, a small folded note in my mother's handwriting that I hadn't noticed before. It contained just 7 words: "I'm sorry, please forgive us. Love, Mom." The note confirmed my worst fears. This wasn't a misunderstanding. My entire family had made a deliberate decision to cut me off completely. And somehow my mother had managed to slip me this cryptic apology, her only explanation for destroying our relationship. The question was no longer if this was happening, but why. If you're still with me through this emotional roller coaster, I appreciate it more than you know. My world was spinning out of control, and what I discovered next in my investigation would change everything I thought I knew about myself and my family. But before I share the next shocking revelation, take a second to hit that subscribe button if family mysteries intrigue you. Your support means everything during this difficult story. 1 week after receiving that devastating text message, I dragged myself out of the fog of despair. If my family wouldn't give me answers, I would find them myself. I was a professional problem solver in my career. I could apply those same skills to my personal life. I started by creating a detailed timeline of events leading up to the cutoff. I needed to identify the turning point, the moment when everything changed. I grabbed a corkboard from my office and set it up in my living room, attaching index cards with dates and events, connecting them with red yarn like a detective in a crime drama. It would have been almost amusing if it weren't my life falling apart. Working backwards from the text message, I mapped out every family interaction over the previous month. A pattern quickly emerged. Everything seemed normal until Cousin Lily's wedding 3 weeks ago. That's when subtle behaviors began changing. The wedding itself had been a lavish affair at a country club outside the city. As Lily's maid of honor, I'd given a heartfelt toast that had the room both laughing and tearing up. Nothing unusual had happened during the ceremony or reception. Except, there was a moment at the reception I'd nearly forgotten. Uncle Frank, my father's brother, had been drinking heavily all night. As I passed his table heading to the bathroom, he grabbed my wrist, his eyes glassy from champagne. It must be nice, he slurred, living your perfect life, never knowing the truth. Before I could ask what he meant, my father appeared almost instantly at my side, extracting my arm from Frank's grip. That's enough, Frank, he said in a tone I rarely heard him use. You've had too much to drink. She deserves to know, Robert Frank insisted, his voice raising slightly. After all these years, don't you think it's time? Not another word, my father warned, his face flushed with anger. This isn't the place. He steered me away, explaining it away as drunk Uncle Frank being drunk Uncle Frank. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now the exchange took on new significance. Later that same evening, I'd found my mother crying in the bathroom. I assumed she was emotional about her niece getting married, but she seemed startled when I entered, quickly wiping her eyes and claiming allergies. When I tried to hug her, she held me so tight it was almost uncomfortable, whispering "my beautiful girl" into my hair before composing herself and returning to the reception. The family photo session at the end of the night also stood out in retrospect. In the formal portrait, my parents stood unusually far apart from me, with Amanda and Brian creating a buffer between us. The photographer had commented on the strange arrangement, but my father insisted it was fine. These memories shifted my investigation from what happened to what my family might be hiding. I needed to talk to someone who might have answers but wasn't directly involved in cutting me off. Cousin Lily was the obvious choice. She hadn't been part of the group text, and we'd always been close growing up. I called and texted her repeatedly with no response. She hadn't blocked me on social media, but she wasn't responding to my messages there either. The wall of silence extended beyond my immediate family. Running out of external options, I turned inward, searching my apartment for anything that might provide answers. In my bedroom closet, I pulled out boxes of childhood memorabilia my mother had given me when I moved out. Photo albums, school awards, report cards, the documented evidence of my life as Danielle Wilson. As I flipped through baby photos, something caught my attention. The dates written on the backs of the photos didn't align with what I knew about my early childhood. According to my baby book, I took my first steps at 11 months, but the photo documenting this milestone was dated 2 months after my first birthday. Similar discrepancies appeared throughout the album. Nothing major, just small inconsistencies in the timeline of my early development. Digging deeper, I found a file folder containing important documents: birth certificate, social security card, vaccination records. My birth certificate showed I was born on May 17th at Memorial Hospital, but the birthday my family had always celebrated was May 21st. I'd never noticed the 4-day discrepancy before. Why would my family celebrate my birthday on the wrong day? Behind these documents was a stack of old letters yellowed with age. They were exchanged between my parents during a period when my father was traveling for work when I was about 2 years old. Most were typical love letters, but several contained cryptic references. "The situation is under control. Dr. Lewis says not to worry. I don't know what to tell her when she's older. We need to decide soon. The papers came through. We're in the clear now. No one will ever know." These fragments painted a picture of parents harboring a secret about me. But what? On a hunch, I called Dr. Lewis, the pediatrician who had treated me throughout childhood. He had retired years ago, but still lived in the community. When his wife answered and I identified myself, there was a pause before she put him on the line. "Danielle Wilson," he said, his voice guarded. "It's been a long time. Dr. Lewis, I'm trying to find my parents. They've gone away suddenly. I thought you might know how to reach them." "I'm afraid I can't help you with that," he replied carefully. "I haven't been in touch with your parents for many years. Do you remember treating me as a child? Were there any unusual circumstances you recall?" The silence that followed was telling. "Danielle, some questions are better discussed with your parents. I'm sorry, but I really can't say more." Before he hung up, I blurted out, "My birth certificate says May 17th, but we always celebrated my birthday on the 21st. Do you know why?" Another pause. "I think you should talk to your mother about that." Click. His reaction confirmed my suspicions that whatever secret my family was keeping, it involved my birth or early childhood, and apparently others knew about it too. That evening, while searching through a box of winter clothes, I found my father's old wool jacket that he had given me years ago because I loved wearing it in college. Checking the pockets, I felt something small and metal, a key I'd never noticed before, taped to the inside pocket with a faded label, "Storage #42. I recognized it immediately. My parents had rented a storage unit across town for years, supposedly to store holiday decorations and furniture that wouldn't fit in our house. I'd never paid much attention to it, but now it seemed like the next logical place to search for answers. The key felt heavy in my hand, a potential doorway to the truth my family was so desperately trying to hide from me. The storage facility was located in an industrial area on the outskirts of town, a place I'd visited only a handful of times over the years, usually to help my parents retrieve Christmas decorations or store furniture. Access required both a key and a security code. I knew the unit number from the key label 42, but the code was a potential obstacle. After 3 failed attempts using my parents' anniversary and my siblings' birthdays, I tried my own birthday, the real one from my birth certificate, May 17th. The keypad flashed green and the gate swung open. It was nearly midnight by the time I arrived. The facility was deserted, security cameras, the only witnesses to my investigation. I parked in a shadowy corner of the lot, away from the harsh fluorescent lights that illuminated the main entrance. This felt illicit somehow, even though I had every right to be there. This was my family's unit, and I was searching for answers about my own life. Unit 42 was located in the back corner of the facility. My hands trembled as I fitted the key into the padlock. It turned smoothly, suggesting regular use. I lifted the rolling metal door, wincing at its loud rattle in the silent night. The smell hit me first, musty cardboard, and the faint scent of my mother's lavender sachets that she placed in everything she stored. I pulled the chain to turn on the overhead light, revealing a meticulously organized space. My mother's touch was evident in the labeled boxes and clear plastic bins stacked against the walls. Everything was exactly as I expected: holiday decorations, old furniture boxes labeled with each family member's name containing childhood memorabilia. I began with the most obvious place: the boxes labeled Danielle. They contained what you'd expect: school projects, report cards, swimming medals, my high school graduation gown. Nothing revealed any family secrets or explained why they'd cut contact with me. Moving deeper into the unit, I noticed something odd. Behind a wall of neatly stacked boxes was a small path leading to the back corner. Someone had deliberately created this hidden access point. I squeezed through the narrow passage to find a locked trunk with a small brass nameplate, "Danielle Private." My heart raced as I examined the trunk. It had a simple combination lock, nothing sophisticated. I tried my birthday again, 0517, and heard the satisfying click of the mechanism releasing. Whatever was inside, my parents had used my actual birth date to protect it, not the one we'd celebrated my entire life. The trunk's contents were meticulously preserved, each item stored in acid-free tissue paper or plastic sleeves. On top was a baby blanket I'd never seen before, pink, with embroidered rabbits and the initials DC in the corner. DC, my initials were DW, Danielle Wilson. Beneath the blanket was a hospital bracelet, the kind placed on newborns. The name read, "Baby Girl Carter, born May 17, 1992, my birth date." But Carter wasn't my last name. The next item made my blood run cold: a set of adoption papers partially completed but never filed. They listed James and Elizabeth Carter as the birth parents of baby Danielle Carter, with Robert and Margaret Wilson as the intended adoptive parents. But I'd never been told I was adopted. My parents had always presented me as their biological child. Deeper in the trunk, I found newspaper clippings from 32 years ago. The headline from the Chicago Tribune jumped out at me: "Local family pleads for return of kidnapped infant." The article detailed the disappearance of 3-month-old Danielle Carter from her crib during a brief power outage. The accompanying photo showed a devastated young couple, James and Elizabeth Carter, holding a teddy bear that belonged to their missing daughter. I sat back on my heels, the reality washing over me in waves of nausea. I wasn't Danielle Wilson. I was Danielle Carter. And I hadn't been adopted, I'd been kidnapped. With shaking hands, I continued unpacking the trunk. There were more newspaper articles about the kidnapping investigation, which eventually went cold. Photos of the Carter family at press conferences pleading for information. A missing child poster with an infant's photo and an age progression sketch that looked eerily like my childhood photos. At the very bottom of the trunk was a sealed envelope addressed to me in my mother's Margaret's handwriting. I couldn't bring myself to open it yet. First, I needed to confirm what seemed increasingly obvious. Last year, on a whim, I'd done one of those DNA ancestry tests that was offering a special discount. I'd been curious about my health markers and ethnic background, but when the results came in, I'd been too busy with work to do more than glance at the ethnicity percentages before filing the information away. I'd completely forgotten about the DNA relatives feature. Pulling out my phone, I logged into the testing company's app and navigated to the relatives section. There they were, several close relatives I didn't recognize with match percentages indicating first-degree relationships. At the top of the list was a user named Elizabeth Carter, showing as a likely parent divided by child relationship. There were messages from these matches dating back months, all variations of, "Are you related to the Carters from Chicago? You look so much like our family." I'd never seen these messages. They'd been buried in an app notification I'd ignored. But someone else must have seen them, someone monitoring my accounts, someone who realized the truth was about to come out. It all made terrible sense now. Margaret and Robert Wilson hadn't just disappeared because they were hiding something. They'd disappeared because they were criminals. They hadn't adopted me, they had stolen me, and now that the truth was threatening to emerge, they had taken my siblings and fled. The realization left me breathless, sitting alone among the evidence of my shattered identity. I wasn't who I thought I was. My family wasn't my family. My entire life had been built on a kidnapping. And somewhere out there were my real parents who had been searching for me for 32 years. I know this revelation seems unbelievable. I sat in that storage unit for hours trying to process it myself. If you've ever had your whole identity turned upside down, or discovered a family secret that changed everything, let me know in the comments below. While I take a moment to gather myself before continuing this story, please consider subscribing to hear the rest of this journey. I had to decide whether to reach out to my biological family or try to find the people who raised me. The choice I made led to consequences I never could have imagined. Back in my apartment, surrounded by the evidence I'd collected from the storage unit, I faced an impossible moral dilemma. What do you do when you discover your entire life has been a lie? When the people who raised you, who you loved unconditionally, turn out to be criminals who stole you from your real family? Part of me wanted to forget everything I'd learned. I could ignore the evidence, continue searching for the Wilsons, and pretend I never discovered the truth. But the knowledge couldn't be unlearned. And somewhere out there was another family, my biological family, who had lost their baby daughter 32 years ago. I began researching the Carters, starting with the old newspaper articles. James and Elizabeth Carter had been a young couple living in the Chicago suburbs when their 3-month-old daughter was taken from her crib during a power outage in their neighborhood. They had never given up hope of finding their child, keeping the case active for decades and working with various missing children organizations. Using social media, I found them easily. They still lived in the Chicago area, only about 30 miles from where I'd grown up. James Carter worked as an architect, and Elizabeth was a retired nurse. They had 2 sons, Michael and David, both in their late 20s, my biological brothers born after my kidnapping. The Carters maintained a Facebook memorial page titled Remembering Danielle with regular updates about their missing daughter me. They posted on my birthday every year, sharing age progression photos and renewed pleas for information. The most recent post included a digitally aged photo that looked strikingly like me, alongside a family photo of the 4 Carters. The resemblance between Elizabeth and me was undeniable. We had the same heart-shaped face and dimpled smile. The page also revealed that the Carters hosted an annual missing child awareness event on May 17, my actual birthday. They had turned their tragedy into advocacy, helping other families of missing children, while keeping hope alive for their own daughter's return. As I scrolled through years of posts, the magnitude of what the Wilsons had done became clear. They hadn't just stolen a baby, they had stolen decades of memories from this family. Birthdays, graduations, holidays, all the moments parents should share with their child. The Carters had spent 32 years wondering if their daughter was alive or dead, while I grew up just miles away, oblivious to their existence. Further research revealed that the Carters had never sold or repurposed my nursery. According to a local newspaper article from 5 years ago featuring their advocacy work, they had preserved the room exactly as it was the night I disappeared, a time capsule of pink walls and stuffed animals, waiting for a child who never came home. The anger I initially felt toward the Wilsons was now complicated by guilt. What right did I have to disrupt the Carters' lives? Would revealing myself bring closure, or simply reopen old wounds? And what about my feelings for the Wilsons? Despite what they'd done, they were the only parents I'd ever known. The people who had tucked me in at night attended my school plays, taught me to drive, and celebrated my accomplishments. Could people who did something so terrible also genuinely love the child they stole? I spent hours staring at the Carters' family photos, searching for traces of myself in their features. David had my eyes. Elizabeth and I shared the same smile. Michael had the cleft chin I'd inherited. These genetic connections were undeniable, yet these people were strangers to me. Meanwhile, news reports about the Wilsons' disappearance had begun to surface. Local media described them as a family who had suddenly abandoned their home, with neighbors expressing concern about their well-being. There was no mention of me or kidnapping, just another human interest story about a mysterious family disappearance. I wondered if the Wilsons were watching these reports from wherever they were hiding, knowing the real reason for their sudden departure. The theories about why my family had cut contact were becoming clearer. They must have realized I was close to discovering the truth. Perhaps they had seen the DNA messages from the Carters, or maybe Uncle Frank's drunken comments at the wedding had spooked them into thinking the secret was about to be exposed. Brian's withdrawal of my $15,000 suggested they needed cash to flee quickly, money that wasn't tracked to their names. After days of agonizing, I made my decision. I wouldn't contact the Carters directly, not yet. First, I needed to understand the full story of what happened 32 years ago. The original kidnapping investigation might hold clues about the Wilsons' involvement and current whereabouts. And there was one person who would know more than anyone about the case. Detective Harrington, the lead investigator mentioned repeatedly in the newspaper articles. A quick internet search revealed that Thomas Harrington had retired from the Chicago Police Department 15 years ago, but still lived in the area. He occasionally gave talks at local colleges about cold cases, including the Carter kidnapping, which he described in interviews as the case that got away. With trembling fingers, I composed an email to the address listed on his personal website. Detective Harrington, My name is Danielle Wilson, though I have reason to believe I was born Danielle Carter. I recently discovered evidence suggesting I may be the infant who was kidnapped from the Carter family 32 years ago. My family has suddenly cut all contact with me, and I believe it's connected to this discovery. I would appreciate the opportunity to discuss the case with you in person. I'm not sure where to turn or what to do with this information. Respectfully, Danielle. I attached a recent photo of myself and links to the Carter family's memorial page showing the age progression photos. Then I hit send, feeling as though I'd just crossed a point of no return. Whatever happened next would forever change multiple families' lives, including my own. Detective Thomas Harrington suggested we meet at a small coffee shop in a neighboring suburb, away from familiar territory where I might be recognized. I arrived 20 minutes early, claiming a corner table with a view of the door. My hands trembled slightly as I sipped a latte, rehearsing what I would say to the man who had spent years searching for me. At precisely 10 a.m., a tall, heavy-set man with silver hair and weathered features entered the cafe. Despite being in his 70s, he carried himself with the unmistakable alertness of a career law enforcement officer. His eyes swept the room before landing on me, and something in his expression shifted recognition perhaps, or simply professional interest in the woman who had made such an extraordinary claim. "Danielle," he asked, extending his hand. "Thomas Harrington." I stood to shake his hand, noticing how he subtly examined my face. "Thank you for meeting me, Detective. Call me Tom. I've been retired for years." He settled into the chair across from me, declining my offer to buy him coffee. "I brought my own," he said, raising a battered thermos. "Old habits." For a moment we sat in awkward silence. Where does one begin a conversation like this? Finally he spoke. "I have to admit, when I got your email, my first thought was it was some kind of cruel prank. I've had a few over the years, people claiming to be Danielle Carter. But none that looked like you." He pulled out a folder and slid a photo across the table. "This is an age progression photo created by FBI specialists 5 years ago, predicting what Danielle Carter might look like as an adult." I stared at the image. It could have been me in slightly different makeup. The resemblance was uncanny. "You understand why I need to approach this cautiously," he continued. "The Carters have been through enough without false hope." I nodded, then wordlessly opened my own folder, containing everything I'd found in the storage unit: the baby blanket with DC initials, hospital bracelet, newspaper clippings, and photos. I explained how I'd discovered them, detailing my family's abrupt disappearance, and the DNA test results showing a parental match to Elizabeth Carter. Harrington examined each item methodically, his expression giving nothing away. When he finished, he leaned back and studied me for a long moment. "I worked this case for 14 years before I retired," he said finally. "It was the one that kept me up at night. We had so little to go on, no witnesses, no ransom demand, no clear motive. The Carters weren't wealthy, had no enemies. It just didn't make sense." "Were the Wilsons ever suspects?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Everyone in the area was questioned. "I remember the Wilsons' young couple recently moved to the neighborhood. Margaret was pregnant at the time." I flinched. "Pregnant? That's impossible. Amanda is 3 years younger than me." Harrington nodded grimly. "Margaret Wilson was approximately 6 months pregnant during our initial canvass of the neighborhood. Later interviews with neighbors confirmed she had been pregnant, then suddenly wasn't, and then had a baby, with no explanation of what happened in between." "But you didn't investigate further." "We did, but they had solid alibis for the night of the kidnapping. Robert was at a business dinner with colleagues until midnight. Margaret was supposedly at her sister's house in Milwaukee, confirmed by both her sister and brother-in-law. The timing didn't work." "They could have had help," I suggested. "That was my theory, that they used an accomplice. But we couldn't prove it. Without evidence or witnesses, we couldn't get a warrant to investigate further." His expression darkened. In those days, we didn't have the DNA technology we have now. Cases like this were solved through witness testimony or confessions, and we had neither. I tried to process this information. The people I called my parents had planned this, created alibis, possibly hired someone to steal a baby, then pretended Margaret had given birth prematurely while away visiting family. What happens now? I asked. Is there a statute of limitations on kidnapping? No statute of limitations on kidnapping, Harrington replied. But proving it after all this time will be challenging. The DNA match helps, but we'd need more to build a case against the Wilsons. He paused, considering his next words carefully. However, their sudden disappearance following your discovery is certainly suspicious. And there's another concerning element. What's that? If they fled because you discovered the truth about your identity, that's one thing. But if they fled because they feared legal consequences, that suggests they might still have something to hide beyond the original kidnapping. He leaned forward. Your family's sudden coordinated disappearance is concerning. Normal people, even those who've committed past crimes, don't typically abandon their homes, jobs, and identities overnight unless they fear imminent arrest. The implication was clear. There might be more to this story than just a decades-old kidnapping. I can arrange for a formal DNA comparison with the Carters, Harrington offered. It would provide definitive proof of your identity. But I need to warn you, once that happens, this becomes an official investigation. The media will get involved. Your life and theirs will never be the same. I considered the Carters, who had spent 32 years wondering what happened to their baby daughter. They deserved to know the truth. But I also thought about the Wilsons, who despite their terrible actions had raised me as their own. Did I want to see them arrested, imprisoned? And what about Amanda and Brian, my siblings who weren't my siblings? They were victims in this too, their lives built around the same lie as mine. I need time to think, I said finally. Harrington nodded understandingly. Take the time you need, but be careful. Your family's sudden disappearance is concerning. As we were preparing to leave, Harrington's phone rang. He answered, listened intently, then looked at me with renewed concern. That was a colleague still on the force, he said, after ending the call. The Wilsons' house has been completely emptied, furniture, personal belongings, everything gone. This wasn't a hasty departure. This was planned well in advance. The realization hit me hard. My family hadn't just panicked and run when they thought I discovered the truth. They had been preparing for this moment perhaps for years, ready to disappear at the first sign their secret might be revealed. Danielle Harrington said gravely, this isn't just about a kidnapping anymore. There's something else they're hiding. Something that made them willing to abandon everything rather than face questions. I left the coffee shop with more questions than answers, and the unsettling feeling that I'd only scratched the surface of my family's secrets. 2 days after meeting with Detective Harrington, I agreed to a DNA test, comparing my DNA to samples the Carters had provided years ago for the investigation. While we waited for the results, a mere formality given what the ancestry test had already revealed, Harrington arranged for me to meet my biological parents. The meeting would take place at the Carters' home with Harrington present, to facilitate what would undoubtedly be an emotional reunion. The drive to the Carters' suburban home was surreal. I'd passed through this neighborhood countless times over the years, never knowing my biological family lived just streets away from the familiar roots of my daily life. Their house was a well-maintained 2-story colonial, with bright flower beds and a basketball hoop in the driveway, the quintessential family home. Harrington met me at the curb, his expression gentle. They're nervous, he said. They've waited for this moment for 32 years but never quite believed it would happen. That makes 2 of us, I replied, smoothing my blouse for the 10th time. Walking to the front door felt like moving through a dream. Harrington rang the bell, and moments later the door opened to reveal a petite woman with graying blonde hair and a face that stopped me cold. It was like looking at an older version of myself, the same eyes, the same heart-shaped face, the same dimple in the right cheek, when she gasped upon seeing me. "Oh my God," Elizabeth Carter whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "It's really you." For a moment no one moved. Then Elizabeth stepped forward hesitantly, her arms half raised, silently asking permission. I nodded, and suddenly I was enveloped in the embrace of the woman who had given birth to me. Her familiar scent triggered something primal within me, a recognition beyond conscious memory. "Elizabeth, let's move inside," Harrington suggested, gently, aware we were creating a scene on the front porch. In the living room, James Carter waited, a tall man with salt and pepper hair, and the same blue eyes I saw in the mirror every morning. He stood, frozen, tears streaming unashamedly down his weathered face. "I knew it the moment I saw you," Elizabeth said, still holding my hand, as if afraid I might disappear again. "A mother knows her child." James approached more cautiously, studying my features with wonder. "You have your mother's dimples," he said softly, "and my eyes." The next hour passed in a blur of emotions and introductions. The Carters' two sons, my brothers, arrived shortly after, having been called by their father. Michael, 29, and Thomas, 27, regarded me with a mix of curiosity and caution. The resemblance between us was unmistakable. We shared the same prominent Carter nose and cleft chin. The living room was filled with photographs chronicling a family's life, but also their loss. Among pictures of the boys' graduations, family vacations, and holiday gatherings were regular reminders of me, my baby photo age progression images released by the National Center for Missing Children over the years, and a portrait taken on what would have been my 18th birthday, created by a forensic artist who specialized in aging missing children. "We kept looking for you," Elizabeth explained, showing me a scrapbook dedicated to their search efforts. "Every year we released updated photos, did interviews, worked with different investigators. We never sold your nursery," James added. "It's still upstairs, just as it was the night you disappeared. Some people thought we were crazy for keeping it, but we never lost hope." With Harrington's permission, they showed me the preserved nursery, a time capsule from 1992. With pink walls, a white crib, and stuffed animals arranged precisely as they had been the night I was taken. A baby blanket identical to the one I'd found in the storage unit lay folded on the rocking chair. "We kept duplicate blankets," Elizabeth explained, noticing my recognition. "One stayed here and one was with you when you were taken. I made them myself." Back downstairs, they shared the story of the night I disappeared. A spring thunderstorm had knocked out power to their neighborhood. Elizabeth had checked on me at 10 p.m. by flashlight, finding me sleeping soundly in my crib. When the power returned around midnight and she checked again, the crib was empty, the nursery window open despite having been closed earlier. No alarm had been triggered. The security system had been disabled during the power outage. "The police suspected someone had been watching the house, waiting for an opportunity," James explained. "The storm gave them perfect cover." While they spoke, I studied this family, my biological family, trying to reconcile the strangers before me with the undeniable connection I felt. They were careful not to overwhelm me with questions about my life with the Wilsons, respecting that I was still processing everything. "Whatever relationship you want with us is your choice," Elizabeth said, seeming to read my thoughts. "We've waited 32 years just to know you're alive and well. Anything beyond that is a gift." Their grace and patience only intensified my conflicted feelings about the Wilsons. How could I reconcile the loving family who raised me with the people who had committed such a terrible crime against the Carters? As evening approached, a commotion outside drew our attention. Through the living room window I could see news vans gathering at the end of the driveway. "Someone leaked the story," Harrington said grimly, checking his phone. "It's already hitting local news. Missing Carter baby found after 32 years," Michael read from his phone. "They don't have your name yet, but they will soon." The media frenzy had begun even before I'd fully processed my own feelings about the situation. But amid the chaos, one moment of clarity emerged. Elizabeth quietly handed me a small box containing a baby blanket, the original one I'd been wrapped in as an infant, with the initials DC embroidered in the corner. "We've kept this warm for you for 32 years, she said simply, and in that gesture I felt the first genuine connection to my birth family, a thread of belonging that had survived decades of separation. 2 weeks after meeting the Carters, my life had transformed into something unrecognizable. The story of the Carter baby found, after 32 years, had exploded across local media before going national. Despite Harrington's efforts to protect my privacy, my name and photo were everywhere. Journalists camped outside my apartment building, forcing me to check into a hotel under a false name. I took an emergency leave of absence from work, unable to focus amid the personal turmoil and media attention. The DNA test confirmed what we already knew. I was 99.9% certain to be Danielle Carter, the infant kidnapped from her crib 32 years ago. The scientific confirmation made the reality inescapable. I wasn't Danielle Wilson. I never had been. I was hiding out in my hotel room, blinds drawn against the world, when Detective Harrington called with news. "We need to talk," he said, his voice tense. "I'm coming to you. Don't tell anyone where you are." 30 minutes later, he knocked on my door, his expression more grave than I'd seen it yet. He wasn't alone. A woman in a dark suit stood beside him, introducing herself as Special Agent Melissa Garcia from the FBI. "We've located the Wilsons," Harrington said once we were seated. "They're in a remote cabin outside Vancouver, Canada. Canadian authorities are monitoring them, but haven't made contact yet." "Are you going to arrest them?" I asked, my stomach tightening at the thought of Margaret and Robert in handcuffs. Harrington and Agent Garcia exchanged glances. "There's been a development," Garcia said carefully. "The Wilsons have reached out through an attorney. They want to make a deal." "What kind of deal?" "Immunity from prosecution in exchange for information," Harrington explained. "They claim they didn't kidnap you, they bought you." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Bought me like a black market adoption." "More or less," Garcia confirmed. According to their attorney, they were approached by a woman claiming to be an adoption facilitator. They paid $50,000 for what they believed was a private adoption arrangement, though they admitted they knew it wasn't entirely legitimate. "No proper paperwork, no home studies, no court appearances." "But that's still illegal," I pointed out. "Yes," Harrington agreed. "But different from kidnapping. They're claiming they didn't know you were stolen, at least not initially." The story that emerged over the next hour rewrote my understanding of the past once again. According to the Wilsons' statement, they had been desperate to have a child after years of infertility. Margaret had suffered multiple miscarriages, and they'd been rejected by traditional adoption agencies due to Robert's minor criminal record from his college years. Through a friend of a friend, they were connected with a woman who promised to help childless couples find babies through alternative channels. They paid the money, asked few questions, and 2 weeks later were presented with a newborn girl, me. They were told my birth mother was a teenager who wanted no contact, and that the informal adoption would be legitimized through paperwork that would arrive later. "When did they realize I was kidnapped?" I asked. "They claim it was years later," Garcia said. "When you were about 4, they saw a missing child poster with your infant photo. By then, they'd been raising you as their own for years. They were faced with an impossible choice: return you to your biological parents and face criminal charges, or continue the lie. They chose the lie," I said flatly. Harrington nodded. "They moved to a different suburb, cut ties with anyone who knew them during that period, and created a new life story. Margaret pretended to be pregnant, then claimed she'd delivered you prematurely while visiting family out of state. No one questioned it, because no one knew them well enough to suspect otherwise." "What about Amanda and Brian?" I asked, thinking of my siblings who weren't my siblings. Are they involved in this? According to the Wilsons, Amanda and Brian knew nothing until recently, Garcia explained. Amanda was born 3 years after they acquired you, their surprise natural pregnancy, after years of trying. Brian was adopted through legitimate channels as an infant. So why run now? Why cut me off completely? Your brother Brian ran into a Carter family member at a business conference last month, Harrington said. The Carter relative commented on the family resemblance between Brian and the Carters. Brian mentioned it to your parents, not realizing the significance. When they realized the connection might be made, they panicked. The text message cutting you off was their attempt to distance themselves from you before you discovered the truth, Garcia added. They hoped, if they severed ties completely, you wouldn't be able to find them when the truth came out. And my brother taking my money. They needed cash to flee quickly, Harrington confirmed. Credit cards can be traced. The betrayal cut deep, not just the original lie about my identity, but the calculated way they'd abandoned me when discovery threatened. Yet part of me understood their impossible position. They'd made a terrible choice decades ago, then spent years living with the consequences, building a life on a foundation of deception. There's more, Garcia said. The Wilsons are offering information about the woman who sold you to them, information that could help identify others involved in what appears to be a sophisticated child trafficking operation that operated throughout the Midwest in the early 1990s. Others, I echoed. The Wilsons believe you weren't the only baby sold this way, Harrington explained. Based on conversations with the facilitator, they suspect dozens of children were taken from hospitals or homes and sold to desperate couples willing to pay and ask few questions. The implications were staggering. How many other families might be living my same nightmare? How many other adults might discover their entire identities were based on lies? Prosecutors are considering the deal, Garcia continued. The information the Wilsons have could potentially solve numerous cold cases and bring closure to many families. In exchange, they'd receive immunity from kidnapping charges, though they would still face lesser charges related to false documentation and potentially obstruction of justice. Before I could respond, Harrington handed me a sealed envelope. This came for you through their attorney. It's from Margaret Wilson. The letter was handwritten, the familiar looping script, bringing an unexpected wave of emotion. My dearest Danielle, there are no words adequate to express my remorse for the pain we've caused you and the Carters. What began as a desperate desire for a child became a lifetime of deception that has hurt so many people. We loved you from the moment we saw you, truly, deeply loved you as our daughter. That love was never a lie, even when everything else was. When we realized years later what we had unknowingly participated in, we were faced with an impossible choice. Selfishly, we couldn't bear to lose you or face the consequences of what we'd done. Our decision to cut contact was made in panic and fear, not for lack of love. We believed if we disappeared completely, you might be spared some of the pain and media attention that would come with the truth. We were wrong, and our actions only hurt you more. I don't ask for forgiveness. What we did is unforgivable. But please know that every bedtime story, every bandaged knee, every proud moment watching you grow, all of it came from genuine love. You were wanted and cherished every day of your life with us, even if the circumstances that brought you to us were wrong. With deepest regret and enduring love, Mom, Margaret. I folded the letter, my emotions too complex to name. Margaret Wilson wasn't my biological mother, but she had been my mom in every way that mattered throughout my childhood. She had committed a terrible wrong against the Carters and me, yet I couldn't erase 32 years of genuine love and care. What happens now? I asked Harrington and Garcia. That's partly up to you, Garcia replied. The Carters have indicated they don't want to press charges against the Wilsons. They believe enough lives have been damaged already. But the decision to offer immunity in exchange for information rests with prosecutors. And if their information helps find other missing children, I asked. Then, many families might finally get the answers they've been seeking for decades, Harrington said, including potentially some of your childhood friends. My friends, what do you mean? Based on preliminary information, the woman who sold you to the Wilsons operated primarily in your area during that time period, Garcia explained. It's possible that some children you grew up with, neighbors, classmates, might also have been illegally obtained. The revelation was dizzying. How many lives would be upended if the truth came to light? How many families would be torn apart by revelations like mine? As Harrington and Garcia prepared to leave, I found myself standing at a crossroads between justice and mercy, between my biological family and the family who raised me, between truth and peace. Whatever path I chose, nothing would ever be the same again. I had lost one family, found another, and somehow needed to reconcile both halves of my fractured identity. 6 months after the text message that shattered my world, I stood in my parents' kitchen, my biological parents' kitchen, stirring cranberry sauce for Thanksgiving dinner. Through the archway to the dining room, I could see 2 distinct family groups awkwardly attempting conversation. The Carters, James, Elizabeth, Michael, and Thomas, sat on one side of the extended table. The Wilsons, Margaret, Robert, Amanda, and Brian, clustered together on the opposite side, looking tense but present. This unlikely gathering represented months of painful conversations, legal negotiations, and emotional reckonings. The Wilsons had returned from Canada under an immunity agreement that protected them from kidnapping charges in exchange for their testimony against the trafficking ring that had sold me and potentially dozens of other babies. They still faced lesser charges for document falsification and had been sentenced to probation and community service, a lenient outcome made possible by the Carters' insistence on mercy rather than retribution. Need any help? Elizabeth asked, joining me in the kitchen. We had developed a cautious but growing relationship over the past months. She wasn't yet mom to me, that title still belonged to Margaret in my heart, but we were finding our way toward something meaningful. I think I've got it, I replied, smiling. But thanks. It's brave of you to do this, she said softly, bringing everyone together. Brave or foolish, I quipped. The jury's still out. The Wilson-Carter Thanksgiving had been my idea, a symbolic attempt to acknowledge both halves of my identity and begin healing the fracture between my past and present. Not everyone had supported the plan. Detective Harrington thought it was premature. My therapist had concerns about emotional boundaries. But I had insisted. If I was going to move forward, I needed all the pieces of my life in the same room, no matter how uncomfortable. The Wilsons' testimony had proven invaluable to investigators. The woman who had sold me to them, Judith Parker, now 70, had been arrested and charged with operating a sophisticated child trafficking ring throughout the Midwest in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Evidence suggested she had stolen or purchased more than 30 babies from hospitals, homes, and occasionally desperate birth mothers, selling them to couples willing to pay premium prices for private adoptions with minimal questions. The investigation had led to the identification of 17 adults who, like me, had been illegally obtained as infants. 3 had been my childhood neighbors, including my best friend from elementary school, Sophia. Each case now represented a family in crisis, grappling with the same impossible questions of identity and belonging that had consumed me. The Wilsons' return had been complicated. Margaret and Robert's genuine remorse was evident in their cooperation with authorities and their willingness to face the consequences of their actions. Their explanation that they had initially believed they were participating in a quasi-legal private adoption and only realized years later that I had been kidnapped was supported by evidence and ultimately accepted by prosecutors. When we saw your picture on that missing child poster, we were faced with an impossible choice, Margaret had explained during one of our painful reconciliation conversations. return you to strangers who were your rightful parents, and go to prison, or keep the child we'd been raising and loving for 4 years. We made the wrong choice, but we made it out of love for you." I understood their reasoning even as I struggled with their decision. In their position, would I have made a different choice? I couldn't honestly say. My relationship with the Wilsons remained complex. Amanda had initially struggled with the revelations, feeling that her entire family narrative had been built on lies. Brian had been more accepting, perhaps because, as an adoptee himself, he understood that family bonds transcended biology. Both had eventually come to terms with the truth, and were working to rebuild their relationship with me, not as siblings by birth, but as siblings by choice and shared history. In the dining room, I could see Brian had managed to engage Thomas Carter in conversation about baseball, while Amanda was showing Michael photos on her phone. Small steps toward a new normal. Bringing the cranberry sauce to the table, I took my place at the head, the bridge between my two families. James Carter stood to carve the turkey, a task traditionally performed by my father, Robert Wilson, at Thanksgiving dinners throughout my childhood. I caught Robert's eye across the table, seeing his understanding of the symbolism in this moment. He nodded slightly, acknowledging the shifting dynamics without resentment. "Before we eat," I said, feeling all eyes turn to me, "I want to thank everyone for being here. I know this isn't easy for anyone, but having both my families together means everything to me." Elizabeth reached for my hand on one side, Margaret for the other. These two mothers, one who gave birth to me, one who raised me, connected through me in a tangible symbol of the reconciliation we were attempting. "We're celebrating two things today," I continued. "Thanksgiving, obviously, but also my birthday, my actual birthday, May 17th, which we're acknowledging belatedly." I gestured to the two cakes on the sideboard, one decorated with "Happy Birthday Danielle Carter," the other with "Happy Birthday Danielle Wilson." I've spent months trying to figure out who I am, Carter or Wilson. The truth is, I'm both. I was born Danielle Carter, but I grew up as Danielle Wilson. Both identities are real. Both families are mine. Later, after dinner presents and cautiously warming conversation, I stepped onto the back porch for a moment alone. The weight of orchestrating this gathering had left me emotionally drained but hopeful. Detective Harrington had called that morning with news that another family had been reunited through the ongoing investigation, a small victory in the larger tragedy of so many stolen lives. The door opened behind me, and Margaret stepped out, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the November chill. "You did good in there," she said, leaning against the railing beside me. "Better than any of us deserved." "I'm still figuring it out," I admitted. "Some days I'm angry about the lies. Other days I'm grateful for the love, complicated as it was." "That's fair," she nodded. "The two can coexist." We stood in comfortable silence for a moment before she spoke again. "I've been thinking about what you said in there about being both Carter and Wilson. You know, when we cut contact, we thought we were protecting ourselves. But what we really needed, what we all needed, was the truth. And now we have it," I said. "For better or worse." "For better," she insisted. "In losing us temporarily, you found your true self. And eventually, you found a way to bring us all back together." As we returned inside to the awkward but healing gathering of my extended, complicated family, I realized the wisdom in her words. My family had texted they needed distance, but what we all really needed was truth. In losing them, I found myself and eventually found all of us again. If my story has touched you in any way, please consider hitting that subscribe button to hear more real-life family journeys. Have you ever discovered a family secret that changed everything? Let me know in the comments below. Family bonds can be complicated, broken, and rebuilt in ways we never expect. Thank you for witnessing my journey from betrayal to reconciliation. Like this video if it resonated with you, share it with someone who might need to hear that healing is possible, and remember that sometimes the most painful truths lead to the most genuine connections. Until next time, this is Danielle Carter Wilson signing off.